Okay. Hello and welcome to all of you that are here and to all of you that are downloading. We come to one of those classic places in the knowledge of human design. It is, in essence, the very foundation of what this knowledge is about and what it's for. And the understanding of type is something that over 20 years now has been explored in all kinds of different ways. And obviously, I have taught many different courses about all of this. But I would like to keep it to a particular perspective. I mean, I would like to begin with a real understanding of what this means, this type. We're going to be looking today at generators, pure generators, manifesting generators. You know, when I was given the knowledge, I was not given type names, you know, generator, manifestor. I was simply told that there were 4 different configurations. And there were 4 different kinds of vehicles. Basically, you know, General Motors, Mercedes, you know, Ford, I don't know, 4 different companies making certain kinds of vehicles. And without sounding flip, it's really, in a sense, the easiest way to grasp what type leads to. That is, we've already seen that there's no such thing as type until we see the nature of the definition, that the definition, or lack of it in the case of the reflector, and we'll look at that the definition establishes what is the consistent imprint, and it's out of this consistent imprint that we get a holistic configuration, what we see in this body graph. You know, a body graph rooted in a circuitry matrix, and we get to see a certain configuration in that circuitry matrix. Now, what you get to notice, and it was an interesting process for me because it wasn't just simply that it was new knowledge; it had never been taught, and it, you know, at the same time that I was trying to digest on the surface what I had been given, I was also at the same time in the process of trying to attract other people to the knowledge. When I first began teaching the knowledge, you know, I just dealt with the basics of definition and what definition led to. And when I began training people, I trained them in, and those trainings were quite limited, I trained them in as much detail as I was comfortable in that sense giving them. In those early years, it was clear to me that nobody recognized that there was a grouping of the graphics, and again, not anybody's fault. After all, new knowledge and very limited in what I was actually able to share in those early years. So I began what I considered to be the second step in developing the transferability of human design. That is, to be able to point out very clearly these 4 different vehicles and to begin to show a generic way in which they all operate. This is the basis of type. That is, the fact that there is a division of 4 is without question. And when I say that it is without question, in the late 1990s, human design and its calculation system was placed through a whole statistical research process. And basically that research was focused on the legitimacy of the differentiations of type. In other words, basically what was done was a statistician was given type data based on samples that were rooted in 5,000 calculations each. 4 of those 5,000 calculations. When I say 5,000, we didn't use actual birth data. We invented it, if you know what I mean. In other words, for statistical purposes, so that we took 5,000 dates spread out over 1 decade, and then took 5,000 dates spread out over another. We covered 4 decades. All that information was crunched. In other words, the type that was a byproduct of all of those particular dates was crunched into the whole statistical program. The results of that, and they were published many, many years ago, the results of that were that not only was there a clear distinction in that sense between types, but that the possibility that was a construct, in other words, the possibility that I, for example, had made it up and said that, these are the 4 different divisions. I remember being quite impressed by the fact that the odds were 60 million to 1 against the possibility that anybody could figure that one out. So it was interesting to see that that was one of the early scientific confirmations that I received. The most astounding, obviously, was the discovery that indeed the neutrino had mass. But for me, the statistical evidence to substantiate type was something that was very important. It said that it was a genetic construct, and only as a genetic construct could it have held up in that sense. The other thing that was very interesting about it statistically was that if you're presenting, for example, what you think is, you're a pharmaceutical company and you're presenting a new drug on the market that you think is going to heal some kind of, or help with some kind of disease. There are huge amounts of tests that need to be done. That is, before the drug can be released on the market. All of those tests are subjected to statistical analysis. And the statistical analysis is, how stable the evidence is of the validity of the medicine. And there is a quotient that's required for that in order for that drug, whatever it is, to be released. And that quotient, I don't remember how the numbers work, but anyway, it was a set figure. The veracity of the differentiation between types had a quotient that was over 300 times higher than what was required, for example, statistically to verify the validity of a particular drug. So, one of the things that we're dealing with, and we've all learned that, at least those of us who are professionals who have worked with design for a very long time, type is something that has no question marks attached to it. So what are we really looking at then? And of course, this is the real point of all of this. In other words, we're looking at different kinds of vehicles. And the extension of looking at different kinds of vehicles is understanding that the vehicle is expressed through its aura. I mean, the aura is a byproduct, obviously, of the vehicle. But the nature of the vehicle is expressed in the aura. And again, something really to grasp about the understanding of type is that it begins with not so much saying, okay, here is a generator because we've got a defined sacral, but that in the moment that you're thinking in terms of generator, that the first thing you need to understand is the kind of frequency that this particular kind of vehicle puts off. We only have 4 kinds of brands, I mean, it's not like the world the automobile world that we live in, where there's, hundreds of manufacturers, maybe thousands. Here we have 4 different kinds of models. That's it. And so it's very significant in that sense. That is that, there is a unifying construct, and a unifying construct, 4 of these that cover all of our species. And that these particular vehicles aren't just simply an arbitrary way in which, a configuration is pulled together, but these frequencies have very, very specific ways in which they operate, because they are vehicles. In other words, this is a type of bioform, a type of human bioform. And what makes it a type is not so much what is in here as an example, but it's how all of this operates. I mean, this is the key. This is what human design brings. It brings an understanding that this is a vehicle, and the vehicle has a way of being operated correctly. We all learn that. Any kind of vehicle, from bicycles upwards, you learn that a vehicle can only operate in a certain way. You learn how to operate the vehicle. You're not going to put diesel in a gasoline engine, and so forth and so on. So the first thing to recognize about type is that type distinguishes us into 4 different kinds of vehicles. Now the vehicles are interesting because they are driven differently. See, this is where you get into the magic of this knowledge. See, these are vehicles, and they're driven differently. They're driven differently. That's what makes them different. It is what defines their lives, is the fact that they are driven differently. And of course, herein lies the dilemmas of homogenization and conditioning. What happens to the non-energy type when it's conditioned by the energy type? What happens to the way in which it is driven? So we have a vehicle. And the vehicle has an expressed frequency, that aura. When we're looking at a generator, we are looking at an open and enveloping aura. Open and enveloping. No vehicle has a more powerful and more expansive aura than the generator vehicle. This is the open aura. And enveloping. It surrounds things. It takes them in. And because it takes them in, generators are deeply susceptible to conditioning. It's why, of all the types, only the generator is here to focus on themselves. They need to find that focus on what is consistent in them, because that open and enveloping aura is going to bring things into them very powerfully, because they pull it in. This vehicle pulls things in. When you first learn about your design, if you're a generator, you have to deal with the big R word, Makes them all nervous. The response word. What does it mean to respond? What does it mean to not initiate? Now think about the vehicle. It's a generator vehicle. And the main principle of this vehicle is that it envelops and pulls to itself. Now think about its strategy. And think about the dilemma that comes with the madness of the not-self. I have done the readings of so many generators, thousands of them. And you say to them, the best things in life, those things in life that are really, truly for you, good, bad, indifferent, you have to let them come to you. You have to let them come to you. And it doesn't matter what it is. It makes absolutely no difference what it is. The littlest to the biggest. But think about what this vehicle does. It envelops and pulls things to it. It's one of the things that I always try to remind generators of. Your aura is doing the talking. You know, the generator that's always afraid, if I don't do it, somebody else will. If I don't do it now, it's not going to happen. Yeah. But you see, their aura is so incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, I'm a manifestor. I have an undefined sacral center. I live in a house of generators. Oh boy, are they powerful. Their auras literally fill every nook and cranny of available space. This is their power, after all. It is the power expressed by this kind of vehicle. Open, enveloping. See, my approach with generators and generator courses in general has always been to try to get them to understand the magic and the beauty of what it is to be the generative force on the planet. Because that's what a generator is. I mean, when we look statistically at generators, at the combination of the pure generator and the manifesting generator, we've got about 67-68% of humanity. I mean, this is what keeps the world alive. Everybody else is non-sacral. Projectors, manifestors, reflectors. You know, this is not the world that we create. We live in a generator-created world. In a generator-generated world is better as an expression. And we understand something very, very basic, because the moment that you come to design and you find out that you're a generator, the first thing you learn about is your not-self theme, frustration. And when you think about the fact that 67 or 68% of humanity are generators, and that nearly 100% of them are not self, that you know that we live in an enveloping world that envelops all of us in this dense field of frustration, stagnation. It's a generator world. In all the different approaches I've had with generators, I try to talk to them about the holiness, really, the incredibleness of what it is to be a generator. I mean, you know, the generators are here to live out the perfect existence in absolute harmony with the world around them. And like the Druids said, with no need to do, because it all gets done. And all of those ways of describing the this and the that of the generator, you know, the sign over Delphi that said, know thyself, that's only for generators, all that stuff, put it aside for a moment and see the vehicle, the machine, the mechanism. It's a mechanism. It really is. It's a mechanism. You know, it's a biomechanism. It's sophisticated. It's interesting. But it happens to be part of a set of type of mechanisms. And what is the type that, you know, that grouping? What is it actually for? I mean, you know, what does it point to? Where does it lead? Who's the driver? In the G center is the monopole. And the monopole is the key to everything. Literally. Within this construct, It is the monopole that holds us together in the illusion of our separateness. And it gives us our direction, our movement in this line of geometry. And that the way in which that movement is expressed is along the track of our nodes in our design. Everything about us is that we do have a driver. And we don't have a driver because we sit still. We have a driver because the vehicle is in movement. You see, these are not just simply different models, these vehicles. They have different ways in which they move. Obviously. And not only do they have a different way in which they move, but in order for each and every one of them to be able to express the nuance, what we are as a unique being, is that we have to know how to steer. It is the driver, the monopole, that steers. But the monopole is subject to the laws of the illusion, its frequency. And this frequency is determined by one thing and one thing only. It is determined by how we steer. You know? And we steer in the sense that it becomes a concept for us. You know, this is the concept of making a decision. It's what type is for. Type doesn't tell you who you are. It can't. It doesn't tell you how you truly connect to the world around you. Not truly. See, that's not what type is about. Type is about driving the vehicle. It's about how to drive the vehicle. It's about how to steer the vehicle. It's the vehicle's guidance manual. The nuance of in that type is so profound. There are so many variations that are there within any possible model. It isn't about trying to find who you are through your type. It's about finding out how to become you through your type. By knowing how to make decisions. See, we live in a binary. It's a deep thing, this binary. This and that. And we are always navigating between this and that. Always. This is what it is to be in a binary. And there are always these possibilities of ways to go. We all know this from our minds. The ways to go are endless. But there's only one way that's your way. And it isn't anybody else's way. But you can only get there through being able to make decisions. See, here's where the great struggle is in the knowledge. You know, the difference between who we think we are and the way in which our mental functions operate, rooted in all the not-self stuff and whatever else. And then, of course, on the other side, what is truly hidden from us. You know, what we have no conscious access to. You know, what is really there in our form principle. We've had a great dilemma. You know, the great dilemma is that it is here that we have the ability to be able to move ourselves correctly in this life. This is all about the vehicle. But you can't get to any of this by thinking about it. You don't have access to it. You don't. You cannot integrate your design into your life because you think you can. You cannot. They will always be two very separate things from each other. Always. It is held together here. It is held together by the frequency of this illusion. And this illusion is moving in space. And it needs to make adjustments as it moves along. And historically, who we think we are is also who thinks it's the driver. This is your mind. Your mind says, I am going to be the driver in this life. I'm going to decide where we go. I mean, this is the not self. And of course this leads to the chaos and the emptiness of the not self life. See, human design in understanding that this is a vehicle and recognizing that it is the vehicle that is literally the life. That everything about strategy is about giving the authority over to the vehicle and the vehicle's cognitive potential. It's about taking it away from the personality. It is about decision making, but not the decision making of the mind. A decision making process that's actually very mysterious. Because you can't really get to the root of it, because it is unconscious. But it reveals itself. And it reveals itself through its ability within us to express its presence, if we know where it is. I mean, if we know where it is. See, to be a generator doesn't mean that you're standing around waiting for anything. You're not. Generators are alive. I mean, they're alive, you know. They have all of this power in them. It's about the decision, and only the decision, that has to be made in response. This is what it's all about. It's the decision making. It's not about, I will go there. There lies folly. That's not the way you drive this vehicle. This vehicle drives, steers in response. This is what it does. This is where it's at its best. Reacting to the course in front of them instead of trying to plow their way blindly. And when they're reacting to the course that's in front of them, they're brilliant. Making this adjustment and that adjustment as they move along. Decisions in response. Not life. Decisions. It's what type is for. It's so you can know how to make a decision as yourself. To make a decision in that sense, that is the decision of the vehicle implemented by the driver. It's not about your mind getting in the way, getting lost, making up some kind of story. It isn't. It's a vehicle. It doesn't matter who you are. If you've got, that big red center there, smack in the middle, all lit up. There's only one way to steer. It's not like you can reinvent the wheel. It's not like you can change the way in which the navigation system works in the vehicle. You cannot. You can just get lost. And it's nuances. It's, it's in the nano world. These, slightly off and you miss everything. This is all about where you are. See, I can, go on and on and on about all of the various things about what it is to be a generator and this and that and the other thing. Yeah, very interesting. It was pointed out before the class, I've posted to the Jam Player my signature series of lectures on type as a free access for people. And by the way, if you haven't heard them, certainly listen to your type, because those are some of the, I think the best example of any lectures, standing lectures that I've done on type. There's all kinds of that kind of information. But you see, I want you to be simpler in the approach. Before you get into the nuances of the ways generators work and whether some can go and others can't and this and that and blah, 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 and all the nuances of it, the difference between the emotional generators and the splenic generators and the ego and this and that. There's all these things and all these variations that are used in order to build a character construct. But I want to get back to what this is really about. Yes, type does bring out similarities. These are similar vehicles. And the not-self generator is very obvious. Perhaps the most obvious of types. But the key in all of this is just to see what this is. It's a vehicle and it's a mechanism of how to steer the vehicle. How to drive it, how to guide it, how to move it correctly. We don't have a deep love for the body on this plane. We don't. We really don't. And it's been a very, very long time since the awe and wonder of consciousness has been focused on our form and not on the vagaries of our minds. The mechanism is extraordinary. We've been blessed in the last 100 years with scientific investigations that, rather than demystifying or, making mundane the nature of these vehicles, it is just awe-inspiring how sophisticated, how incredible these mechanisms really are. We pay attention to our bodies only when we are suffering from them. And we do not treat them as the intelligence that they are. We don't. Because we don't see our bodies as different from our personalities. We've been so busy owning our bodies and dictating our folly in these lives that we have never had an opportunity to recognize two very simple things. One is that we are a binary consciousness, and the other is that we have been ignoring the most important consciousness we have. See, this is what type brings us to. See, the type gives you a technique to reach the correct authority, to be able to have conscious relationship, a personality relationship to what is the correct authority. After all, it is your mind that takes this in. It is the weakness of the mind, how curious it is, and its rationale that it can always deny what it takes in. See, the secret is just an understanding. The vehicles come with their own consciousness. There's the first thing that, if you look at, there's been so many interesting investigations in human design, and one that was fascinating for me and contains a treasure trove of information, is the work that I did on pregnancy, on the whole 9-month process, and particularly the first 88 degrees of the process, where the infrastructure of the vehicle is built, where there is no personality, where the personality won't be in the vehicle until 88 degrees or 88, 89 days approximately before birth. This vehicle is intelligently guided through all of that process. And you see it so clearly in these early stages where the vehicle and the driver, that is the design crystal and the monopole, are alone within the vehicle. That they don't have any companion of the personality. That the personality doesn't come in there. I mean, the arrogance of the personality. The Johnny-come-lately that gets to sit in the back seat, and thinks that it's going to drive the whole show, when the show has been built on this relationship. When somebody is following their strategy and authority, what they are doing is that they are aligning themselves to what is in fact their deep intelligence within the vehicle, their cognition. It is in fact the cognition rather than the sacral itself, in a sense. It is the cognition that is actually making the decisions that gets expressed in this particular case through this splenic sacral connection. And it bypasses the mind. And the decision is made between the driver and the vehicle. And you see, the dilemma is that the personality, the personality always wants to be the driver, always trying to, do away with the monopole in the sense. It wants to select the direction. It wants to be the one that's in charge. And of course it can't. It just doesn't work that way. So you end up with, the dilemmas of the not-self, the deep dilemmas of the not-self. It's a vehicle. It's all about how it's driven. And in the way in which we experience the Maya, this driving of the vehicle, the steering, the navigating of the vehicle, this is what type gives us these very, very simple keys. Inform, respond. All right. Let's briefly just look at the the generator configuration itself. The sacral center is a center that obviously has enormous power. It is the center fundamentally of our fertility. It is the key to the way in which all life forms operate. To be a life form without the sacral is just not, that doesn't work. It is life itself. And as such, it's very powerful, which means that one of the dilemmas of the sacral is how it's nourished. The way in which the body has been ignored, one of the primary ways in which the body has been ignored is through diet. Affluence, particularly affluence in industrialized countries throughout the world, whether in the East or the West, that affluence leads to disarray in the way in which food is taken in and the kinds of foods that are taken in, the way people eat. I mean, one of the most extraordinary things of the last 60 or 70 years is the phenomena of food service, that is, restaurants of all kinds, of all natures, anywhere in the world. How extraordinarily abundant they are, the way in which the eating process and the way in which food is provided, and the way in which we are trained in our relationship to food. One of the things to be clear about in terms of honoring the vehicle is that ultimately honoring the vehicle is something that is quite complex and takes great dedication in life. That is, you honor the vehicle by sleeping in your own bed. You honor the vehicle by eating correctly. You honor the vehicle by operating correctly. There's many stages in that sense to finally being able to embrace the temple that is our form. After all, the mind, as brilliant as it is only a passenger and can never be anything more than a passenger. That is, it is the gift of mind to be able to find a way, to be able to experience phenomena, and to be able to digest the experience of phenomena, and to play with it, to play with it on the mental plane, to be a good passenger, to be a good observer, to be a good watcher. And that's very different than the function of what appears to be anyway our lives. All of this comes from the vehicle itself. And it means that if you're operating correctly, in this case as a generator, that is, if you're making decisions out of response, there are many levels of things that are slowly correcting in your system. But most important is that you're beginning to change your geometry. Now, the dilemma for the generator, of course, is that generators suffer from manifestor disease. And manifestor disease, which is even worse in manifesting generators, manifestor disease is a real killer. That is, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And that's manifestor disease. Obviously, everything about the generator and its potential falls apart the moment that the generator is dictating what it's going to do. And again, this is the whole business of who is going to be the driver. Is the monopole going to be allowed to do its job in that sense, being properly guided by the cognition of the vehicle? Or is the personality constantly interfering and constantly trying to be the driver? And again, this is, the simple beauty of human design is that these vehicles, which, absolutely exist within the context of the Maya, that each of these vehicular groups, they truly have their own way to be driven. And unless you drive them that way, they don't work. You just get all the dilemmas. I mean, if I look at this person's design, it's obvious to me that, their whole life is caught up in, in looking for skills in the now. I don't even have to talk about them, in terms of what's possible for them, because I already know how deeply conditioned they are. And then there's all the openness that goes with all of that, and there's enough of it. And then you end up with this situation where you have somebody that has absolutely no connection to what they are. And it is this mind and its unconscious ideas and its mouth that just won't stop, that keeps on saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do the other thing. Frustration. Just plain old-fashioned frustration. And if you say to them, look, you got to wait until, you have a chance to respond, blah, 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 all that, they say, no, it doesn't work. Who's going to ask me? Who's going to come to me? Where am I? And then they forget what it is to be a generator with a powerful, open, and enveloping aura. You're the generator girl at the high school dance, and if you live your generator nature, you won't have to sit there very long, because you've got an open and enveloping aura, and it pulls things towards you. Now, you may not be happy about everything that it pulls towards you, and you don't have to say yes to anything that approaches you just because it's correct, that they are operating correctly. It just means they're respecting you for who you are. But you don't want to get up and go looking for somebody to dance with. It would be a horror. I mean, it's just not going to work. You're just going to end up being frustrated. And it's not about saying, oh, woe is me, I can't go and get it. It's about understanding who you are and how powerful that is. I mean, I'm non-sacral. I know how powerful the sacral is in pulling you in. Boy, does it pull you in. I mean, it takes effort for a non-sacral being to get out of that enveloping aura. I mean, projectors can't. You know, I mean, I know all the stuff that generators will say about projectors, but I want to tell you something. You know, to be a projector in a generator aura is no cup of tea either. They can't get out. They have to be let go. I mean, I'm a manifestor, you know, I get out, but it doesn't mean that there isn't friction and dilemmas in getting out. It's a very powerful aura pulling things into it. You don't have to worry about not being asked. You don't have to worry about not being approached. It's inherent in you to pull that towards you. All you have to do is let it come, and then you can begin to divine what your life is. Because your life is a series of adjustments as you move. It's this series of adjustments that's made through the decision-making process. Decision by decision by decision. You know, one of the subjects that's always discussed about the pure generator is the power of, or the potential power of, the generator voice. You know, I know the dilemmas of that. I know the dilemmas of doing readings for generators, and they don't even hear their own generator sounds. They're so disconnected to it. They're so attached to the verbal. You know, here would be a deep conflict in this person. You know, they're deeply connected to their verbal stuff. You know, they want to express themselves verbally. They want to initiate verbally. You know, this is going to be a very, very limited sacral. There'll be a sacral that will emerge maybe while they're eating, maybe while they're having sex. You know, it is a sacral that is not going to be powerful. It's one of the things about the sacral is that not all sacrals have this deep tonal potential in it that it just jumps at you. But all sacral beings have these sounds. If you listen to them, you will hear them. They just have never been given power or dominance. And again, one of the things that's very important for generators when they first begin the process is to really go through a question and answer session, several actually, and particularly if they're emotional, many. And not particularly for the answers. I mean, I don't discount what the answers may be. But you see, for me, that exercise is an exercise that empowers the sacral center. I mean, it gives it voice for the first time. And for most people who are generators, their sacrals are dysfunctional. That is, they're not healthy. They are, in many ways, the sacral voice is repressed. They have been frustrated too long, and they're deeply, deeply lost in their, you know, in their manifestor disease. So, you know, the basic keys in what it is to be a generator, you know, one of those things that all generators have to come to grips with is trying to find a way, you know, to enliven, if you will, the power of their sacral. Something very important for generators to keep in mind is that, Generators need to have a very, very specific kind of sleeping pattern. That it's very important for generators to go to sleep exhausted. And, I don't mean burnt out, unless you're a particular burnout person. But I mean when they've really had it. It is not healthy for generators, and I've talked about this in relationship to children, not healthy for generators to have early bedtimes, for example, as kids, because it is very distressing for them and very unhealthy for them. The healthiest generators are those that go to sleep when they can't stay up anymore. And in that way, while they're sleeping, they get the full regeneration of their sacral system. And obviously they have a healthier morning when they wake up. The other thing, of course, is again, and this goes without saying, that the integrity of the aura is everything. It's essential for people to sleep in their own aura. Otherwise, there's very little you can do to help somebody. If you don't wake up as yourself, it's practically impossible to get you there. So it's one of those things that are really very much a part of, you enter into this experiment, you enter into an experiment of really transforming your life. It is what it's about. I watched the other day a lot, by the way, the television show, because you had a nice piece in that Ion Design, and your comments about human design being heresy, and it is, and the heresy begins with how you sleep. Sleeping alone is not something that has ever been a common practice. It goes against the genetic imperative. And it is one of the first steps in freeing yourself from the homogenized rules of the way in which we're supposed to exist, and opens up the possibility slowly for you to begin to define your own existence, your own reality, your own possibilities. Humanity, for most of its history, has been just trapped in the deepest possible conditionings because nobody ever woke up as themselves. I mean, this was the fantasy that, you were going to spend your life curled around another body. Anyway, so, it's something to keep in mind. My final comments here about the manifesting generator, and obviously, this, by the way, is not a pure manifesting generator. There's only one. That is those people that have the 2034. That is the direct connection between the sacral and the throat. That's actually a pure manifesting generator. All the others are generators who happen to have a manifesting capacity. And in this case, that capacity is through the archetype and then up here through the channel of talent. When we're dealing with a manifesting generator, we already have a problem. That is, their parents raised them to be manifestors. And they are manifestors. So for all intents and purposes, they live a manifestor life. But they live a manifestor life that has tremendous handicaps. And it has tremendous handicaps because if you look at, and we will, at the manifestor, we see that the manifestor has a closed aura that is repelling. Now that's not what a generator is, and this is a generator. It doesn't matter what kind of configurations are in there. A generator is a generator is a generator, which means their aura is open and enveloping, not closed and repelling. Which means that when they play the manifestor role, they get more resistance than anybody else. They get more resistance than manifestors. They get more resistance than pure generators trying to be manifestors. They get tremendous resistance. The other thing is that the longer they are involved in their manifestor trip, the more problems they have in terms of their relationships with others. And what I mean by that is that the tendency in the manifesting generator is to bypass things. In other words, to try to, eliminate frustration at light speed. When manifesting generators enter into anything, they're always moving too fast. And it means that they overlook things and they forget things, and because they are caught in the manifestor game, they don't want to go back and fix them either. It brings back this distaste for frustration. The pure generator suffers from its frustration. The manifesting generator fights it and ends up even more frustrated. So, one of the dilemmas for the manifesting generator is to realize that this is not a unique model. It's the most important thing to grasp. I can remember people when I was doing all of this work and introducing type, and it came from certain people that were part of my work at the time, to try to establish the manifesting generator as as a fifth type. Well, it's not. And it's not simply because, first of all, statistically, that's not valid. Second of all, the voice was very clear that there was only 4 kinds of vehicles. It is generator. And the dilemma for manifesting generators is that they have to accept that they're generators. It's only when they come to grips with the fact that no matter what they look like in here, it's all very nice, blah, 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 but the vehicle expresses itself exactly the same, open and enveloping aura, and that decision making has to be made in response, otherwise they're not going to have the right direction. And of course, this open and enveloping aura, when they're not correct, they are open and bring in resistance. They pull it into themselves. See, type is never going to tell you who you are, but it does tell you how to get there. That's the thing. That's what it's for. It's not to be confused as a personality construct, a persona construct. We'll see that in profile. That is, we'll see that there are all kinds of characters who operate through all the various different vehicles. But when you're looking at type, you are looking at the secret of the knowledge. Because when you're looking at type, you're simply looking at how, first of all, that there are these 4 different vehicles, and second, how to operate them correctly. That's all. If you only get that much, your life will be transformed. Just that. Because this is the secret. It's so on the surface, it's unbelievable. It's right there on the surface. It's not deep, 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 deep down. Because deep down doesn't tell you how to drive. It doesn't. It may tell you how to stay healthier. It may be able to awaken your mind. It may be able to show you connections that transcend the obvious. But only this gets you there. All those deep things don't matter if you're not correct in the way in which you drive in this life. This is your vehicle. This is what it demands. And these vehicles are only different by the way in which they are steered. Nothing more, nothing less. And the movement is decision making. That's what we call it. This adjustment in the constant movement between this and that. So we find our way through that. The secret to life. The secret to perfection. It's really an amazing thing. So when you think about type, there's 2 things to think about. What is the aura? And how does it steer? This is it. Everything else, it's all interesting. It's all interesting. It's so interesting. I've been teaching it over 20 years and I still have not lost interest. It is interesting stuff. But what makes your life worthwhile is its correctness. And that's about the driver. That's about the vehicle. Decision making. This is the secret. And type, it tells you very simply, there's only 4 ways to steer. You know? There's only 4 kinds of decision making. All right, good morning to all of you that are here and to all of you that are downloading. We continue our look at type. And today we're going to focus on projectors. Before I get into looking at projectors per se, it's interesting to just put things into context. Human design is something that has a unique perspective on the evolutionary process. That is, it's part of the general cosmological knowledge associated with design that at the time of the discovery of Uranus in 1781, that we had a transition from what had been the 7-centered vehicle, that is the 7-centered vehicle best known through Hindu Brahmin chakra system, that 7-centered vehicle that had been literally our vehicle since the time of the Neanderthals, that is a huge span in terms of the development of what we call the modern human. And in 1781 we had this transition to the 9-centered form, that is the form that is called Rave, in terms of the way in which we look at it as a classification. The Rave body graph is an example. It's really represented by the fact that we have this 9-centered form. Now, there is no end to hierarchies. The Maya is built on them. And the division that we understand as type, this division has had its hierarchical dimensions. I mean, it's something to recognize immediately when looking at the question of type, is to recognize, like everything that you will see in human design's as a binary system, it is dualistic. That the moment that you look, you're always going to see that there are these 2 sides of things. And one of the things that we're dealing with in this transition from the 7-center to the 9-center is that we're dealing with the emergence of a new kind of being. 80% of humanity, just below 80% of humanity are energy types. Humanity is dominated by generators and manifestors. Now, manifestors are minor; they're only about 8 1/3% of the population, but the generators are about 67 or 68%. Together, they represent basically 3/4 of humanity, and that means that humans driven as energy types were something that fully dominated what was the 7-centered era, an era that was fundamentally strategic. The advent of the 9-centered being brought something new. That is, it brings the emergence of the other side, that is the passive to the active, the receptive to the strategic, a very different way in which the orientation of our senses, a very different way in which our evolution is moving. And we have these 2 sides of the coin. That is, human beings are divided actually in terms of the way in which we do holistic analysis. Human beings are divided according to their leftness and their rightness, or combinations thereof. And all of this is a preamble to beginning to understand something about the projector. The projector is the largest. It is basically the vast majority of what we call the non-energy types, that is projector and reflector, but reflectors are 1.4% of the population, and projectors are somewhere between 22 and 23% of the population. Projectors are in fact a very large group, the second largest group behind generators. And in terms of the hierarchical way in which the pre-nine-centered life worked, it was basically ruled by manifestors. And one of the things that I've talked about over the years as a way of trying to express a fundamental change in the era that we live in now, that began in 1781, is that this is the time of the ascendancy of the projector. And basically it is the ascendancy of a different way of doing things. And, I'm being very simple at that level. Energy types do things in a certain way, get things done in a certain way. Non-energy types are very different. One of the things about understanding dualism is to understand that within the context of the way human design is laid out mechanically and graphically, what you don't have is where you can become wise. And of course, this is the first thing to recognize about what it is to be a projector, just to begin with. What you don't have, and here is an archetypal example of it. What you don't have is what you have a potential wisdom for. So here, in looking at this particular projector, we are looking at not simply the standard, in other words, the moment that the sacral center is defined, you have a generator. And so, it is always the rule in trying to define a type, to begin with, you look at the sacral to see whether it's defined or not. Obviously, if you're only looking at the sacral level of this, this could be a projector and it could be a manifestor. It obviously can't be a reflector, until you take a look at the rest of the story. In other words, that, in this particular case it's obvious because you have an undefined throat. The throat could, as an example, be defined up here to the ajna center, and obviously this would still be a manifestor because there's no continuous connection. But, the first thing to recognize is the generalization of this. In other words, instead of just looking at this and in the obvious way that we do when we look at the surface in human design, look at conditioning, and obviously we'll talk about the conditioning of projectors. The thing to recognize about them is that the thing that they are most naturally wise about is the use of energy. It's the thing they're most naturally wise about. It doesn't mean, by the way, that they act wisely, because of course they're not self, and as not self, there is no way for them to be able to live out the advantages of what it is for them to be a projector. But to continue my cosmological line for a moment, with the projector on the ascendancy, because the projector is not a strategic, in that sense, entity, that it is a much more receptive entity, that it is easy for us to imagine the leader that leads, like the manifestor. The manifestor is the obvious example of what one would think of as the leading type. They stand up there and they say, I am going this way. They let everybody know, they inform, it's correct, I'm going this way, and if you want, follow me. This is basically the manifestor. And one would think, in the terms of leadership, that is what leadership is about. The problem is that our concepts of leadership are rooted in our seven-centered history. That seven-centered history that predates 1781, that still is very much alive today in the way in which our consciousness works, in which leadership is precisely that. That every child is raised to be a little leader because they're all propagandized to be manifestors, except the manifestors, of course. And so you end up with this dysfunction in the way in which our society is led. All the little leaderships, going, from the family outward into all the various directions. We're entering into an age, we already did, it began in 1781, but in evolutionary time that's nothing. It takes time for things to crystallize. The fact is that it is the time for the projector to take on its role as a leader, but not as a leader in the manifesting sense, but as a guide in the inherent sense of what it is to be a projector. I mean, the name itself says so much about this type. And remember something when we're thinking about type. It is very easy to end up characterizing human beings according to their type. Be careful with that. That is, normally what you're characterizing is the way in which that type operates as not self. Not the way it operates as true self. Because as true self, type is simply a way that guides you to the strategy and authority that's going to be correct for you, that's going to allow you to live out the life that is correct for you. See, projectors have something interesting about them. And what is interesting about them is the way in which their aura functions. We saw last week when we were looking at generators that we saw that they had these open and enveloping auras, taking everything in, very open in that sense, and pulling everything into it, pulling it into their generator bubble. But when you're dealing with a projector is very different. A projector's aura literally focuses. And it focuses on the other. And it doesn't focus, the assumption about projectors is that they're after your energy. Which is not true, by the way. I mean, they're not after it. They don't have to be after it. They were designed to be able to gain access to it. But in fact, what they are indeed focusing on is your identity. This, the G center. I mean, this is where the focus is of projectors. I mean, they're very different from generators. Generators are very self-absorbed because they're meant to be. They're meant to be. No other type is designed to look and only look for, at themselves, to figure themselves out. They have to. Know thyself is a generator mantra. A deep genetic generator mantra. They have to do that, but that's not what a projector is. Or a manifestor or a reflector for that matter. A projector is not interested in themselves. They're not. I mean, it is one of the dilemmas of the projector. How long it takes to wake a projector up to the possibility that there is something that is them, rather than what they get through the other. You see, because they are designed as an aura to focus, they have a unique capacity. It is a capacity to recognize. I mean, that is the language we use. That recognition is not necessarily mental. I mean, it isn't. It is a capacity to hone in on what is in fact the essence of the other being. This is what they do. And because their aura is focused in that way, they themselves, given the nature of their design and all of its relative openness, that they become particularly open. But they don't become open like other people become open. They invite the openness. And their openness is an open invitation, because they're designed that way. Which of course makes it very, very difficult for projectors. Very difficult for them to escape the influence of the conditioning forces that are around them from the moment that they came into the world. The moment they came into the world. You're a generator and a projector, and you're sitting in a room with some obnoxious people. And at some point one of the obnoxious people says something that really is offensive to the projector. And the projector really doesn't do anything. I mean, they may make a comment or something. What they really want to do is get up and get the hell out of there, and they can't. The generator. When it's the generator's turn to be insulted, the generator responds, gets up and leaves, and on their coattail is the projector finally getting a chance to go out the door. That's not an easy thing. It is the power of being conditioned. It is the power of being drawn into situations that are not correct, and on and on and on. But it is something to understand inherently about what it is to be a projector. Is that because you were focused on the other, I think it was Tim earlier asked about the projector endowment. You know, this is something that I instituted when we started the Jam Player, that it would be possible for projectors to have a special discount. It's a relatively large one. It's a 30% discount. It's not on everything, but it's on a lot of things. And the reason that that's there is that I know how difficult it is for the projector in their process of transition to, being able to live out the potential of who they are. They cannot do that without an education. And that education is that they have to be able to understand the other. There is nothing more important for a projector, nothing more important in their life than their ability through whatever mechanism. I mean, it doesn't have to be human design. It can be whatever the hell it is. I mean, projectors are the kinds of beings that need to study systems. Any kind of system. You can be an electrician, an architect, whatever the case may be. But the thing is about projectors is that this is their thing. And of course, because they're focused on the other, and because in so many ways the quality of the other. See, one of my favorite metaphors for many years, but it's a little dark, is that, projectors have to imagine themselves as cannibals. I told you it was dark. And if you're a projector and you imagine yourself as a cannibal, you really have to begin to look at people and wonder whether or not you would actually want to eat them. Because, of course, to be a projector means that you do not simply take in conditioning. You don't. You take in the conditioning that generates, motivates, and moves your process. I mean, it's not that you are dependent on the other. I think this is one of the things that projectors misunderstand when they come into the knowledge and they begin to understand that they're a non-energy type. This assumption that they are dependent on the other. Well, it's an odd way of looking at it. It's sort of a guilty way of looking at it, or a lack of self-worth way of looking at it. They were not designed to be dependent on anything. They were designed to be in a world in which it was available. Now that's very different. I mean, you're a projector born into a world in which there's a lot of generators. Well, very good. It's not like you're dependent on them. I mean, it's, because again, the moment that, you see it that way, you're lost in it that way. There are two things that are so interesting about projectors. It is the binary, after all, the this and that. They have this gift of being able to look out and being able to see something, recognize something in the other. This probing of their aura, this digging in a sense, of their aura. And of course, at the same time, that creates often a backlash. It creates a reaction. And the reaction is recognition. Now, any of you here in this class, or on the download, if you're a projector, there's a great experiment for you to do. I assume you've done it before in your life, and I assume that you understand that it works. But nonetheless, if you haven't, it's nice to do. When you're in an environment, a neutral environment, sitting in a shop or a cafe or something like that, focus your projector attention on somebody's back. Just on their back. And don't be obvious about it. You don't have to. But just focus on it. And see how long it takes them to turn around. I mean, this is the projector aura. It is a very, very focused, powerful aura. And it's the thing to understand about it. So immediately you get the recognition. And of course, most projectors, because they're not self and they're not very aware, this honing in on the back of others is a kind of swiveling lighthouse that is constantly attracting what may be not very effective, not very valued attention. Because projectors will get their attention. I mean, I can remember when I first began to introduce this. And it was one thing to tell all these generators that they couldn't initiate, that they had to respond. But it's another thing to say to a projector, look, you have to wait for a formal invitation. Formal. It seems like an ordeal. It seems almost an impossibility. A generator can be winked at, and it can respond, if you know what I mean. But if you're a projector, it really has to be a formal invitation. This is what the invitation is all about. And of course, the thing is that projectors really don't understand that this would basically be the only way things would happen in their life if they just trusted the power of their aura. You see, the aura that pulls that attention, that pulls the recognition, it pulls the invitation. It's the way auras work. It's the way they do. And it's really something to grasp about what it is to be a projector. You've got this very, very, very focused aura. And yes, it does often disturb the other. There's this illusion, that runs around, about the projector-generator relationship, because I have many times talked about how this is really the foundation for the viability of what we do as humans on this planet, is the relationship between these two. And, one of the things about the response of generators to the pinpointing of the projector aura is that most generators simply resent the fact that they don't seem to get anything back. 67 or 68% of the planet are generators, and generators have enveloping auras. When a generator meets a generator, there is, this mutual aura bubble that's created. It can be obviously very enriching and very special, but there is always this, you're getting something in the connection. And of course, when you're dealing with a projector, as a generator, that's not what it feels like. It doesn't feel like that at all. And of course, this leads to a misunderstanding of what is the inherent relationship. I started my career with a focus, and my focus was to free the slaves. And basically the slaves were the generators. But it's something to understand about freeing the slaves, is that they don't necessarily know what to do when you free them. They don't. It is about freeing them from being manifestors. It's about freeing them to be able to respond in this life. But the gift of being able to know what is good for all in that sense, in the doing, is ultimately the relationship that can be there between the projector, who is there to understand deeply how, where energy should be used, its ability to guide, not lead. It's not replacing the manifestor. The way in which we relate to each other is changing. I'm a manifestor. It's my way or the highway. This is the way I lead. I don't have any other way to do it. I'm a manifestor. This is not the way in which, the movement into the future is intended to be. This was the great change that came in 1781. And until there is this, correct communication that is going to be there between the generator and the projector relative to their respective roles, only then are we really going to see progress. I mean, real progress. So it is, it is an interesting subject. I mean, it's a sidebar to all of this, but it's something that every projector has to deal with. And one of my concerns in talking about projectors is that they don't have an inferiority complex because they're a non-energy type. I mean, that would be a terrible distortion of, what is the unique beauty of what it is to be a projector. We are, as types, I mean, I'm a manifestor, I'm not a generator, I don't have a defined sacral. We are not born deficient because we are not generators. Again, that is something really to grasp. I mean, generators, yes, they are the cornerstone of life on the planet. And there's no question about it. They are the great generative force. But we all have a function in this process, and a necessary one in this process. So to begin with, when you enter into, the beginning of your own self-recognition as being a projector, there's a number of things that you have to realize, that you have to do to lessen the burden of what your process is going to be. And the first thing is to dismiss any idea that you're about to get instant gratification. Because if you're after instant gratification, I suggest that you go see a guru or something, I don't know. Because there is absolutely no instant gratification in this. It is really a process for a projector. Remember, because you are not tuned to yourself, you're saved in that, by the way, given that projectors are open in very vulnerable places. I mean, traditionally the sacral. The fact that you're not, inward pointed in that sense saves you from the heaviness of the conditioning that in fact that you do take in as a projector. The real, I guess the bottom line of, what it is to begin to come to grips with yourself is to begin to see that only as you understand how it works to be human. I mean, this is the great gift of this knowledge. You get to see how human beings function. You get to see the rules by which they function. You get to see the whole process. And all of those human beings in your life that mean so much to you at a mechanical level, and yet can be so bad for you at a personality level, that ultimately you begin to open up a way in which you can develop the most important thing that you need to develop. It's called discernment. Discernment. See, one of the things that generators have as an advantage is that because they are a life force and self-absorbed, a generative force, that, they can immediately get into their process of experimenting with being themselves. And as a projector, you cannot do that. You can't. You can't because you are, in fact, a being that has been deeply, deeply, deeply conditioned. And you have to come to grips with that. See, one of the things that education does for a projector is that it allows it to grasp the depth of its conditioning. Oh, this is when you begin to get very smart. I mean, after all, projectors are, in that sense, born students. If you have a projector child, it's very important to encourage their studies. It's important to encourage particularly those areas where they have special interests, because in fact the projector as a type is here to recognize and to master systems, whatever they happen to be. And with the proper encouragement and the right conditioning, because of course they're so susceptible to conditioning, that there's a great deal of potential in that for them. But in terms of the awakening process, for the projector it's so clear that unlike the generator, they cannot do it alone. They can't. And you can't do it alone, and I'm pointing to the nodes because this is what integrates us into the world and moves us from place to place. We are not alone. we are not alone. And it is obvious and clear that all of us who have open sacrals, reflectors, manifestors, projectors, that we are dependent on being in the world with others. We're dependent on the generator world. We're dependent on it. And that everything about the way in which life is designed, that is the genetic imperative, the way in which we are moved towards pair bonding in order to be reproductive, all of those things, they bind us to a social mechanism. The projector is deeply, deeply bound to a social mechanism. And that social mechanism is not self. It's not self. And the density of not self in a projector can be really profound. And there is no way that suddenly you can turn that around. You can't. Like the projector that has to wait for the generator to be insulted so it can leave the room. Time and study. And study. You see, I started this sort of sidebar with the projector endowment. Manifestors rarely take to being educated in relationship to themselves. Generators are really all you have to say to them is respond, and if they're lucky enough and they get it, it's an incredible transformation. But it was clear to me from the beginning how long it would take projectors. I mean, in the end, it takes everybody the same amount of time. Please understand that. It takes 7 years to decondition the vehicle of an adult. So it takes 7 years whether you're this or that. That is the ability to disengage from the conditioned habits of your life. This is a process that until you fulfill the demands of being educated, and this is the key. You can always tell, by the way, as a projector, what is really interesting for you in this life or not, because if you're not ready to study it, it is not something that you should ever even dabble with, because in fact, this is your gift. Your gift is to really look into things and get the foundation of them. And of course, as a science of differentiation, what human design brings to the projector is it brings the ideal human tool, the thing that can protect it in its process, I mean, waiting for the invitation. This theme of discernment, to know how to select the right beings in your life. And you have to understand something about being a projector, rather than seeing it through the eyes of other types and the way they would see projector. To really see it through your own eyes, and to understand that the very strategy that you have is an indication of the natural demand for respect that you deserve. Think about that, because it's true. You are designed to be beings who are formally invited. I mean, that is a real sign of a very specific kind of respect in that sense for what is your nature. And I mean, it is a key. I mean, any of you who have projector children, begin to invite them to do things. You'll see that there is an enormous difference in the way in which they respond and relate to what it is. Again, projectors suffer deeply as children when being influenced by, being trained or raised to be manifestors. It's something that is really devastating for them. And being told what to do is something that is deeply uncomfortable for a projector. It's just something to grasp. Is that one of the big dilemmas of projectors is that, like reflectors, and reflectors obviously have the most, but they're different because they're all open, is that there's a very high level of open egos that go along with being a reflector. And it isn't to say that there aren't ego reflectors. There are. But in a general sense, it really adds to this lack of worth sense. This sense that, we don't have the energy to be able to do what we want to do, and it seems obvious, and the whole exhaustion problem that comes into the life of projectors when they overdo things. And again, the dilemma of not understanding that you're putting a hole in somebody's back, and if you don't understand that power, you end up paying a price for it, and you really pay a price for it. So, where I want you to begin with your process in that sense of coming to grips with what you are as a projector is to see that you're entering into an education program, and you're entering into a 7-year education program, the same kind of program you would enter into as a as a doctor, as a somebody learning to play an instrument, whatever. They're all 7-year cycles, these things. It's a 7-year education process, and at the end of that process, it's actually going to dawn on you who you are. Because it's all indirect. I mean, this projector, will really understand the open mind when it sees the open mind at work in the other. Not through its own experience of open mind. Because it doesn't really know what it is. It doesn't. It needs a reference point on the outside because it isn't looking inside. And this is one of the things for the projectors, that ultimately it becomes a projection, where they get to see it and it comes back on them and they begin to see it in themselves. It begins to dawn on them. Because it's secondary after all. And slowly but surely this whole thing begins to change the whole mechanism of the way in which the projector operates in the world. You have to surrender to demanding respect. That's quite a thing. Literally demanding it. An example of an ego projector. Just so you know they do exist. Projectors can be incredibly complex. They really can. They can be incredibly complex. I've seen 8 centers defined, and you still have a projector. So you can see incredible combinations of projectors. It's very misleading, as a matter of fact, because the very, very simple projector, like I began with, is often the idea that students first have when they come in. And it's not the way it is. They often have trouble even seeing, sometimes in certain configurations, actually seeing that somebody is in fact a projector. This brings in a whole different element for the projector. 50% of humanity has emotional definition. And to be an emotional anything changes the way in which you operate in the world, because it brings the essential formula that there is no truth in the now. The moment that is the law, and that's the rule for 50% of humanity, it means that the awareness process is laid out in a time frame. And that everything is about waiting, in terms of waiting for feelings to be able to be the guide. Here's somebody that obviously has emotional authority. Emotional projectors, like emotional anything, but particularly emotional projectors and generators, I think it is one of the most difficult things to add on the emotional element to what is basically a responsive way of dealing with life. Or a reactive way, I should say, of dealing with life. It's one thing for the generator to wait to respond. It's another thing that when something delicious comes their way, that because they're emotional, they cannot, in that moment, even though their response is positive, they cannot make the move. And that's very frustrating, obviously. The same thing is true for the projector, but it's an even greater extreme, particularly when you're talking to somebody that doesn't understand this knowledge and is just meeting it for the first time, and they happen to be a projector. And even though there's a deep resonance, because all projectors, when they have their initial reading, it is quite an eye-opener for them. At the same time, it is really quite something to come to grips with and to begin to deal with. And particularly when, the idea that you have to wait to be formally asked. To begin with, this is something that, seems life-threatening in the way in which their not-self has run their life, based on them being a non-energy type. Instead of them, literally harmonizing with the flow of, the plane they're living on, and understanding that those things that are meant for them are going to be there. That's a very hard thing to grasp for most people anyway. And then you tack on the fact that they're emotional, and you say to them, well, yes, but you can't not really be sure that that invitation is the right invitation. You're going to have to ask them to wait a little bit longer, and you're going to have to ask them to come back again. Most people don't have the inner courage to be able to do that, quite frankly. That's why there aren't millions and millions and millions and millions of people doing this right now. This is really heretical, and for the psychology is deeply threatening. I mean, it's why I have great empathy for the projector and a common recognition with them, because I am non-sacral. At the same time, I see very clearly that because they are here to study, that in fact that the way they have to go through their process is ideal for them. I mean, it's ideal for them. I mean, the projector is here to guide. Well, you can't guide if you don't know how the game works. You can't. You can't. And the moment that you understand how the game works is the moment that you find your power. All projectors, I mean, the signature, and by the way, those of you who have missed that or don't know, if you're a projector, in the Jam Player in the free access area, you can listen to my lecture on the projector signature. And the projector signature is about success. I mean, this is something really to understand about projectors. And by the way, it's not a selfish success. It really isn't in that sense. It is a success that only can arise out of correct bonds. It is in many ways a deeply shared success, because the non-sacral beings have to have their transpersonal connections. I mean, they do. And the nature of this success, this is when the projector is empowered by their system knowledge. You see it in the not-self world, but again, you see it on the mundane plane. Projectors in positions of power because of their educational depth and their familiarity with the material, whatever it happens to be, whatever the subject or whatever it is. This is ideal for projectors. I mean, one of the things you get to see in this era is you get to see the advent of more and more projector politicians that are leading countries. And they tend to be the kind of politicians that, can answer questions in the minutiae, because they tend to do their homework. They tend to make sure that they understand what is going on. They tend to be very good politicians in that sense, because they have a grasp of the other. They recognize, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's something really to see about, what it is to be a projector, is that when you enter into your process, instead of having this goal of, I found it, which is very nice, by the way, but nonetheless, save it. Instead of that, I found it, this is it, and my life is going to change. It's, I found something that I can really be interested in. I found something that I can really study and go deep in. And so I'm going to go there. And I'm going to see where it takes me. Because it's the only way that you can approach it as a projector. And the dedication has to be there to explore the knowledge, because the deeper you go into the knowledge as a projector, the healthier you become, and the more empowered you become in terms of the way in which your ability ultimately can be recognized. And that when you're beginning this process, you have to see that you need to, have a real focus on each and every invitation that comes your way. regardless of what it is, and regardless of whether you take it or not, because you don't have to accept it. It doesn't mean just because it's an invitation that in and of itself it's good for you. It simply means that it's correctly delivered and you're being recognized. And there's nothing more, deeply, deeply, deeply satisfying, than being recognized as a projector and being recognized for who you are. Being recognized in the sense that, your role, the potential of your role is something that is recognized by the other. And it's what you get the moment that you really are living out your potential. Nobody is going to invite you blindly. They don't. But again, the dilemma of what it is to be emotional, and it is always something to grasp about, the nature of the emotional system, what it means to wait for truth. And it's always a timing mechanism. I mean, for example, in this person's design, here's somebody that has what is a fairly common element, that is the nodal polarity, and you've got the 40-37, and it forms a definition, and it's all unconscious. So this is not somebody who is aware of their emotional ego. I mean, the way they think about themselves, if you look at this mental system of theirs, they got a fully unconscious abstract channel between the head center and the ajna. And if you just look at the ajna center where conceptualizing takes place, they have one conscious gate, that is the 43rd gate. And the 43rd gate being the conscious gate, this is who they think of. It's these black things. This is who they think they are. They don't think they're an emotional tribal person. Everybody else knows that, because everybody else feels that, and feels that in their aura, particularly in the way their aura gets focused. And only over time will this person understand that this is the way they're perceived by others, and slowly try to come to grips with it. So when you're talking to this emotional projector about, their emotions, it's not about saying to them, tune into your wave. They have a hanging gate, the 55, but it's individual. It's usually planing. They don't really have a sense of their emotional system. But time is a different thing. And you see, this is the whole beginning of the mechanism of, what I'm getting to in terms of the approach of a projector into their 7-year program, is to see this all in a time frame. So that you take the pressure off yourself, that you release yourself from comparing yourself to the way in which generators react to the knowledge and the way they are able to enter into, because they are an energy type, their experimentation in that sense at an earlier stage, but they have much more to do. They have to discover themselves. Your discovery of yourself is secondary. It's secondary. It's always going to be secondary. And it really is only something that's going to be truly clear to you when you enter into your next cycle. That is, once you go through this 7-year process of deconditioning, so that you are not simply operating correctly, but you finally have gotten to a place where you have the right people around you. I mean, this is the most difficult thing for projectors. Because, of course, when they enter into design, like all not-self projectors, they are caught up in, entanglements in the webs of relationships that have been there perhaps for years. They may have children, all kinds of things are possible when the timing is for someone. And obviously for a projector, my cannibalism black joke, obviously for a projector, you're living off the fuel of others. You're living, that energy is energy that you have to use. I mean, it's not like you take it. Again, change your perspective. It's like, geez, I gotta use that energy. I gotta use that low-grade fuel. I gotta use that contaminated fuel, whatever the case may be. And you have to begin to see that it is this discernment process that is being able to, first of all, understand how you can disengage yourself. If you are a projector and you've just entered into this process and you are still sleeping in the same bed as a partner, a lover, whatever, stop. Because otherwise there is no point. And I mean it. There is no point. All you're going to end up with is a lot of intellectual masturbation and nothing else. See, you have to begin to understand something as a projector, is that you have to be able to clean your aura somehow. You have to. You know, the 8 or 9 hours a day that you're able to go into, you know, a secure environment, you know, where your aura is protected, is something that is so important for you. I mean, just the whole business of projectors going to sleep, and it's something that, you know, I caution all non-sacral beings about how important it is, you know, not to exhaust yourself. It is very dangerous and it's very unhealthy. How important it is for projectors that, you know, they get into bed or they get horizontal, you know, before they're exhausted. I mean, you know, this is something that is very, very important for them, you know, to lie in bed and read or something, or just relax before you go off to sleep. But to be able to do that before the exhaustion sets in, and it's particularly important for projectors. I mean, particularly important for them. I mean, exhaustion is one of their biggest problems, and the exhaustion is not just physical. I mean, it is psychic exhaustion, it is auric exhaustion, it's all kinds of things. It's your sacral center crying out for some relief, because it's not designed to be running like that all the time. You know, I mean, all of those things. And you have to see that one of the great dangers for projectors is their relationship, their personal, intimate relationship with generators. You know, when I say that the projectors and generators have an important relationship with each other, I don't mean that from the intimate point of view. I really don't. You know, in all partnership programs that I have done over the years, I've always told people that if I told you the ideal, you wouldn't be interested in it because your genes wouldn't react. You know, the ideal is that, you know, projectors really have a destiny with other projectors at the intimate level. You know, and at worst with another non-energy type, but certainly not with an energy type. It's like with generators, you know. I mean, I'm a manifestor with a generator, and the only thing that preserves that is the energy aspect of that. But these are not ideals. You know, the fact is that as a projector in a generator's aura, you got a generator partner, and the generator partner, you know, it can't really go to sleep until they're exhausted, and they drag you along with them, and because you inflate in the aura, you become even more energized, that when they finally drop off exhausted, you're so tired that you can't go to sleep. And you can end up with all kinds of problems with that. It's just so unhealthy. It begins with the primary heresy in human design, heresy number 1, you know, or heresy 101, however you want to name that, you know, is you sleep in your own bed. I mean, you know, it is just something to grasp. It is not about, you know, I mean, human beings can be very immature when it comes to topics like this, particularly men. You know, because it's not about sex. It is not about love. You know, it's not about any of those things. The fact that you've got an unconscious piece of meat beside you, you know, doesn't mean that is somehow important for you while you're unconscious yourself. I mean, you know, these things are, you know, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the integrity of who you are as a being. If you're a projector and you're sleeping with somebody, you never wake up yourself. Ever. I mean, ever. And this is this is imprisonment to a conditioned life. So this is one of the essentials. You know, it's all right. You get up in that morning and you go back into the world of, you know, your environment, your home, whatever it is, the people that are there, whatever. That's another story. You know precisely what you're taking in when you do that. You know, this is a basic fundamental step that has to be taken by projectors. It has to. You don't do this, you really have no way out. You know, because you have no way of really getting around, you know, the conditioning in your life, no way of ultimately separating yourself from that conditioning. You end up being its prisoner. And you end up with what reflectors get in life, which is bitterness. I mean, deep bitterness. It's something else to understand that, what it is to be a projector, even at its simplest level. And this is a very interesting example, because this is an example in which, you only have, we just saw that, where is it coming from now? It's from the Sun-Earth. You have this configuration of an unconscious emotional system. It's the only thing that's there. And basically, you would think, well, this person's really not there. What is the potential in something like this? One can never underestimate the gift of a projector to be able to grasp a system and take advantage of it. This is actually the design of John F. Kennedy, the American president that was assassinated. Again, my comment earlier about projector leaders and their emergence. Tony Blair, for example, until recently the Prime Minister of England, another example of a projector leader. There's a lot of them, by the way, on the planet right now. Because of this capacity to recognize, this capacity to be able to focus on the other. I mean, it's very cute in my family. My eldest son, he's an emotional generator, and he has a projector addiction, and he's had it ever since he first started making friends. There's no projectors in his family. He has an open throat, and he is a 15.5 and a 59.6. And he likes attention, and he likes to pull people into his aura and pull people into his intimacy and into his flow. And but the people that get there are the ones that give him the attention that he needs. Well, guess who gives him the attention he needs? And of course he's not ignorant of human design. And he has 4 male friends who are his closest male friends at varying degrees at different times. Teenagers are like, they're all projectors. His girlfriends, most of them are projectors. And I was talking to him one day about that, because we joke about it. And I keep reminding him that he's energizing all of that. He says, yeah, I know. He said, but I like it that way. He likes it that way. This is one of the great powers of the projector, is that when a projector gives you their attention, there's nothing like it. And of course it can be very special, or it can be awful, because of course, again, we have not self projectors, who are the vast majority of projectors, who are, digging into somebody's back, when in fact that's not what they were really wanted to do, but nonetheless that's what happens, and they get the result that comes with that. This gift that's there in the projector, this gift to recognize, this gift to be recognized. This is something that you need to hold on to and understand that, this is the protective sheath that is there for what it is to be a projector. And to study, study. Learn as much as you can, and the deeper that you go and the more that you figure it out, the easier it is for you not simply to be a master of your own future, and to really finally have, as a projector, the integrity of your own authority. But you can really be of service. That is, you can really be of value. And, for you to understand that when you give somebody your attention, and remember that the worst situation for a projector is to be in a room with 2 other people. Don't ever put yourself in that situation, if you can avoid it. About anything that's serious, or anything that needs to be discussed or worked out, or whatever the case may be. You're at a terrible disadvantage as a projector in those situations. One-on-one is what you're all about. And remember that you have great power in that situation, and it demands that you're correct. And if you are correct in those situations, the very power of that recognition is something that is recognized, and the beginnings of what can be, with whomever, a fruitful relationship, because after all, projectors are here to thrive, to be a success, and to bring success to their relationships. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. Next week we're going to take a look at, in the first half, manifestors, and in the second half, we will look at reflectors. All right, good morning to all of you, and to those of you that are downloading. And we continue our journey in the four views, looking at type. And today we're going to look at a combination. We're going to look at manifestors, and we're going to look at reflectors. This is my chart, by the way. Obviously, I am a manifestor. And to begin the manifestor story is to begin the story as I'm trying to introduce it to you, in terms of getting a feel for type rather than just seeing the mechanical type there in the body graph, but being able to get a feel of what the various types are in terms of interacting with people. And one of the things that you need in that kind of experiment is that you need a sensitivity to aura, because it is aura that expresses type. We have already looked at the generator aura, which is open and enveloping, so it's the kind of aura that surrounds you, that takes you in. When you meet somebody who has that kind of aura, you're very aware of the fact, if you're sensitive to aura, you're very aware of the fact that you're being surrounded in a sense, you're being pulled in. I think the most common recognized aura impact is that of the projector. When we looked at the projector, we saw that the projector has a focused aura, and it is a focused aura that really burrows into the other person. And, this is something that is highly noticeable. And remember that, this is one of the most fascinating things about type, is that it is expressed through the aura. And those auric qualities, they lead to a certain way in which the being lives out their life. These are controlling factors. If you've got an open and enveloping aura like a generator, it means that you're pulling conditioning into you all the time. You just are. And it means that you're also pulling all kinds of forces towards you, which means that you have to have the best equipment in order to make decisions in this life, because there's so many things that are coming at you that you're pulling in with your aura. Very different than a projector. And understanding that the projector tends to alienate people in certain situations, because they do focus their energy on one person at a time. And of course it means that the way they relate to other people is very different. The way they're perceived by other people is different. All of this is in the aura. So when you come to the manifestor, and you come to one of the smaller type groupings, after all, we've looked at the two largest, the 67%, approximately 67% of humanity that are generators, and the 22 or 23% of humanity that are projectors. We come to manifestors that are just over 8% of the population. Now again, 8% sounds like a minority, but in fact when you're talking about 7 billion people, always keep in mind that there's a lot of them around. There's a lot of everything around in terms of numbers. But as a percentage, it is a minority. And it is obviously, because you can see that right away, it is a non-sacral type. We have 3 non-sacral types: projector, manifestor, and reflector. And in my particular case, you can see that's quite prominent, because in fact I don't have any activations whatsoever in the sacral center. What is it to be a manifestor? Mechanically, what it is to be a manifestor is that one of the body's 3 motors, and there's actually 4 motors in the body, but of course this is a non-sacral being, so we don't include the sacral. one of these three motors in one way or another being connected directly, in this case from the ego, directly to the throat. So the moment that you have a direct connection, for example, if I happen to have the 22nd gate, I would be an emotional manifestor, emotional ego manifestor. Fortunately, I'm not, but nonetheless, that's the possibility. Any direct connection. Now, of course, the root center can never connect directly. So, for example, if I had a definition that went this way, that through the continuous definition upwards to the throat, the motor getting to the throat, you have a manifestor. All right. It is why people get very confused about manifesting generators. They can never be a manifestor. They can never be compared to a manifestor. They are in no way similar to manifestors, despite the illusion. Remember that manifesting generators are raised to be manifestors. Manifestors don't have a sacral. And the difference between having one and not having one is enormous. Literally enormous. A generator is a generator. Anyway, manifestor. Alright, so what we know about the manifestor is that the manifestor has the ability to be able to move its energy into action. In other words, this is an energy type. Here is the motor going to the throat. And the illusion that everybody has about the manifestor is that they can do whatever the hell they want. Well, they can't. It's just an illusion. That is, manifestors tend to operate on their own. And in operating on their own, they tend to look like they're taking their own action. In fact, they're like everybody else. That is, we are all reactive. We are all reacting to the impulse. None of us are in control of the process. However, it certainly looks like they're able to take the initiative. Now, the thing to understand about the manifestor that will give you, a very clear understanding of the manifestor is that it has an aura that is closed and it is an aura that is repelling. Think about that. A closed aura. It's the exact opposite in that sense of the generator. The generator has an open aura. The manifestor has a closed aura. The generator has an enveloping aura. And the manifestor has a repelling aura. As a matter of fact, as you approach a manifestor, the impact of their aura on your aura is that your aura compresses. In other words, auras have a prana, they're not fixed. They expand and contract. The moment that you meet a manifestor, your aura contracts. And of course, there is, there is a psychological quality to that. The fact that you don't feel like you want to get near somebody, because that's often how it's translated. Could be interpreted as many things. That you're suspicious of the aura, which is one of the most common things. The manifestors come into the world, and they come out of the womb, and their mothers look at them, and the mother wants to take this child, this baby, in its arms, and here's this little manifestor with this closed and repelling aura. And of course, it doesn't mean that the mother's going to drop it on the ground, but nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that no matter how close that mother wants to be to that child is always going to be resistant, and the resistance is there in the aura. One of the dilemmas of the manifestor aura is that it leads to suspicion. And one of the things to recognize about manifestor children, because it is where the fundamental problem of the manifestor in the world begins, which is, quite literally true for all, but it's particularly true in the sense that, manifestors are controlled from the moment that they get into the world because there is a suspicion about them. And, it leads to, the fundamental theme of what it is to be a manifestor. And the fundamental theme of what it is to be a manifestor that is not self-manifestor is to be angry. And these are angry beings. These are angry beings that are closed off to others and push them away. And you can imagine that is something that is not an easy thing for a child. It's not an easy thing to grow up. I understand. Obviously, as a manifestor myself, I understand the dilemmas of the manifestor childhood. And it's only now, at this point in my process, years ago when I first began to grasp the knowledge, that I really began to understand why I had the kind of upbringing and why I had the kind of relationships I had with my parents. These were good people and very loving, but there was an enormous distance, if I can put it that way, between myself and them from as early a time as I can remember. And of course, it is what it is to be a manifestor. The other side of that is that, I was, without question, deeply controlled. And I was to notice that throughout my whole process, growing up, going to school. If punishment was going to be meted out, somebody was going to point their finger at me. I understand the manifestor dilemma. So the dilemma for the manifestor child is that they don't understand why they don't have what are basically warm and deeply connected relationships in their childhood. Because this is something that is difficult for them. And obviously they do not have the psychology in that sense to grasp what is going on. It is the manifestor child that goes to school. I have a number of because I have sons that are still in school. And I regularly go there and pick them up. And I know many people that are part of, because they're the people of the island, people that I know, many of them. And I know a number of manifestor children that are in the school, young kids. And, I get to hear the stories from their mothers. It's quite something, the manifestor child, what they go through, particularly in the developing social environment. It is a burden for them. Somebody like me, by the way, was okay. That is, the dysfunction at the social level that happens to a manifestor child. That is, I'm somebody that carries integration, and all of my definition is individual, so I was already pretty freaky anyway. And very different and very much a loner, because integration is very much an alone kind of thing. But when you think about the manifestor child with this, repelling aura, and let's say that they happen to be tribal, emotional, and collective, and all kinds of things, you can imagine how difficult that is. They want to be able to integrate. They want to be able to really be a part of the group and whatever. And they don't get in. They don't get in. There's a surface to it. A surface patina of, those are my friends, but they're not really. And they know it. The manifestor child functions in really what is their own little enclosed shell. It's why there is all this potential anger tension that builds up in the life of the manifestor child until it ultimately explodes. And of course, in, all of the descriptions that I've given of, introduction to type over the years, it is something to understand about strategy. Strategy is an incredible thing. It really is, when one begins to grasp how complex life is. For anyone in their lifetime to grasp the full potential of this knowledge as it's already been presented, it is so profound. There is so much, and yet, and this is the thing that is so special about it, is that illusion operates on the surface. It's on the surface. This is where illusion is. And dealing with illusion is something that one always deals with on the surface. This is what makes strategy so special. It allows us, through seeing the mechanics, to be able to have a technique of being able to navigate correctly in the illusion. It's what strategy is about. And strategy, when it comes to a generator, or to a projector, or to a reflector, the strategy is pure mechanics. In other words, the strategy to respond is derived directly from the mechanics. But this is not true for a manifestor. It isn't. A manifestor in that sense has no mechanical strategy. It has a political strategy, a survivor's strategy, based on its mechanics. But it is not strategy in the way that response for a generator is their true strategy. And when I say their true strategy, it really is a part of them. It is a part of, their genetic makeup. It is the way they are designed to work. But we have to teach manifestors their strategy, because it isn't natural for them. It isn't natural to respond. It isn't natural to be invited. It isn't natural to wake the moon. It isn't natural like that at all. At all. It is a way to protect manifestors from themselves and to protect everybody else from them. I mean, after all, the strategy of a manifestor child, a strategy that must be imposed by its parents, that strategy is that they have to ask permission. Ask permission. If you're lucky as a manifestor child, you come into an environment that is fairly rigid and disciplined, in the sense that, it's orderly and, that the behavioral, the behavioral, cultural conditioning is something that is there. Because in fact, the manifestor that is basically ignored by parents that can't handle it, this is the manifestor that is always going to be a problem to itself and to others. Always, always. We know from the construct itself that the manifestor is able to initiate action. And of course, this is what leads the manifestor child into trouble into the first place, because, and I have my favorite story of what it is to be a manifestor child. It was a lovely day. We had a very pretty home that was on the edge of a forest. And I opened up the back door and went outside. I think that I was 4 years old, and I went exploring. At some point I was very tired and fell asleep under a tree. Of course, my mother went into complete panic. The police department, the fire department, at some point I think there was about 60 or 70 adults that were, lumbering through the forest looking for me. And oh boy, did I get into trouble when they found me. Other than the relief of my mother, who thought that, of course, that I had, gone forever, or something horrendous had happened to me. But after that, boy, was I ever controlled. It was very fortunate for me as a manifestor. I literally had to ask permission for everything. And being unemotional and avoiding confrontation and truth, I eventually figured out a way around all of that. Manifestors will. But nonetheless, I learned good lessons. That is, I learned how to play the game. I learned that if I asked for something that was reasonable, chances were that it was going to be okay, and I'd get it anyway. And so I began to see, how I could avoid being punished for being me. And obviously a process that, as a child you take in quite deeply. You begin to learn the mechanics of how you get along in your environment. So one of the things for the manifestor child, that is parents of the manifestor child, is this necessity, to be able to train the manifestor to ask permission, train the manifestor to learn how to play the game. Because this is the only thing ultimately that will allow the manifestor to be able to integrate with others. Otherwise there's no way. This is the impact of the closed and repelling aura that creates suspicion. The adult strategy for a manifestor is to inform, which is a great freedom for the manifestor who leaves the parental household, and no longer will ever want to ask anyone or anything for permission. Yet at the same time, if they are going to be able to integrate into society, if they're going to be able to have any kind of social dynamic in their lives, they're going to have to learn how to inform. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. You see, informing as a strategy for a manifestor is simply a way of removing suspicion. Because this is what gets in the way of their social life. It is suspicion. When you meet a manifestor, you really do not have any idea what they're going to do. You don't. You may project or this or that, but the fact of the matter is that you really don't. And you don't, not at the psychological level, but at the physical level. At the physical level, there's uncertainty about what you're dealing with. That means that if the manifestor doesn't find a way to communicate effectively, then they are going to alienate others. It's simply the way it works. The dilemma for most manifestors is that they cannot see that informing is not the same as asking permission. Because it's not. My illustration of that is that I'm a manifestor that informs, and basically what that means is that I'm driving a truck down the road, and there's an old lady crossing the street down the road in front of me carrying her groceries, and I honk the horn. That's what it is to be a manifestor. You don't take your foot off the gas. You honk the horn. As long as you honk the horn, you're doing your job. I told her to get out of the way. This is what it is to be a manifestor. And of course, with that comes the consequences of the way in which that is going to be perceived by others, and all the things that go along with that. Not an easy piece of business in that sense. But then again, it's like anything else. Every single type has its drama and has its story. The signature for the manifestor is a signature of peace. The manifestor seeks to be freed of its anger. And, it can never be freed of its anger until it begins to inform so that it can reduce the resistance that it has on the social plane. Because the manifestor's on the outside. The non-sacral beings are really on the outside. And the only ones that really aren't are the projectors, because the projectors have a role to play in the life of the generator. And the two of them, they literally represent the world. They represent 90% of humanity. And that other 10%, manifestors and reflectors, are really out in the cold. We're on the outside of the whole process. And so it's never easy to get in. Which of course, that is not something that you can easily explain to a child. And of course, as I say, not all manifestors are blessed with my kind of serendipity in which I'm so individual and integration. The manifestors that are collective, the manifestors that are tribal, the manifestors that, need to connect in their lives, that dynamic, how important it is for them. And then having this barrier that is there because of the very nature of their aura, that others don't want to approach them. because they don't trust them. So this informing for the adult manifestor is a strategy that has political and social value, because this is what it's about. Manifestors, by their design, are not negative forces. They're not. They can make a valuable contribution. The dilemma for most manifestors is their isolation. And of course that isolation and the anger that they carry within them. Everything about, healing manifestors, unfortunately, is not about adults. And it isn't. Unless you are somebody whose geometry in this life is to deeply, deeply, deeply transform, and that, it is meant to happen, in your process, later in your process. For a manifestor, to really transform as an adult, this is something that's very difficult. There is an enormous sea of anger that is within them. And it has been repressed in that sense for a very, very long time. Not an easy thing. The real healing of the manifestor type is the responsibility of parents of manifestors. Because this is where the whole story can change. This is where the real beauty is. Because you see, the moment that a parent understands this dimension in their child, that they recognize how this child has to be dealt with, what this child needs to learn, they're going to have a totally different relationship, and they're not going to have the negative relationship that usually comes with parents of manifestor children. Parents with manifestor children, invariably, this is their problem, and they don't like it. They don't like it. They feel that they have been burdened with a difficult child. And it's not the child's fault. It's not even their, it's not their personality. It's not the way in which they are as a being in terms of their design. It's just that aura. Closed, repelling. I see that from the other end of the spectrum. I'm a manifestor father. And I see the challenges that are there, and I try to imagine what it's like to be a manifestor parent that is ignorant of what they are, and doesn't understand their impact on the other, and doesn't understand why their relationship with their children appears to have a distance to it that, psychologically that they wouldn't want to have, trapped inside of a manifestor aura and having all kinds of nurturing, tribal, whatever activations, and not really being able to demonstrate them because of the limitation of the aura. If you're not aware of this, it becomes a problem. It does. And it becomes a problem not only for the manifestor, because they do not understand it, but because it's a problem for them, it becomes an accentuated problem relative to their children and the way the relationship is perceived. It's not healthy. It's not. I am clearly a manifestor father. I have 3 generator children. They all know that they cannot enclose and envelop me. And they all had to learn that in their own way. But they didn't have to learn that in ignorance, and it didn't have to be translated into meaning that I did not care for them or love them or, all of the things that go along with what happens in the relationship between parent and child. Well, think about the same thing about the manifestor child and its parent, the repelling aura in which, the parent really isn't interested in pulling the child in, and the child knows that, feels that, interprets it in the way in which the child interprets it. So, the real healing, any healing that's going to take place in terms of the manifestor, this is something that begins with parents. And it is one of the mainstays of my educating of people in human design is always reminding them that this is for children, and that the knowledge needs to be passed on to those who are parents, particularly young parents, parents of young children. This is something that is essential. Save the children. And a manifestor that is properly nurtured in this life, treated according to their nature, and they become productive and well-balanced human beings, rather than being these angry forces that bounce from one failed relationship to the next. Ignorance is a very painful thing. It really is. It creates so much discomfort and pain on this planet. And it's not just about being a manifestor. It's generators that are raised as manifestors. It's projectors that are tormented into being energy types and exhausted before they even reach sexual maturity. And all of this is taking place in the home. All of this is taking place supposedly in environments in which, there's supposed to be love and concern and all of that stuff. And of course there is. It's just that it's ignorant, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know how to see their children. If you want to save a manifestor, save their parents. If you can save their parents, you can save yourself a manifestor. Okay, I go from my chart to Alex's chart. Long-term reflector, student, teacher of human design. And you have to see a lot of reflector charts to tell them apart, by the way. Just, because I could throw up any reflector chart and you all look at all the open centers and go, okay, this is a reflector. But of course, obviously they are different. And I know quite a few of them, so you begin to notice certain accents in the way in which the whole configuration is laid out. Whenever I come to dealing with reflectors, for those of you that really want an in-depth understanding of the reflector, please, here in the Jam Player, go to the free access area, and in the drop-down list, go to lectures. These are all free. And in that group is the Reflector Signature Lecture. And that was one of the most, probably the deepest and most revealing lecture on the nature of the reflector that I've ever given. So any of you that are interested, it's a couple of hours, but as I said, it's free, and it is something worth listening to. And by the way, if you know any reflectors, and that's true of any of the types, by the way. That's why it's there in the Jam Player. Signature is the positive in that sense of all types. It is really what their goal in life is all about, what's there to be achieved. And so it is a perspective that isn't just simply about the not self-torments of being a type, but about the possibilities and the potential that's there. So if you're interested in any of the types, but particularly, as I say, reflector, because it is a very profound subject, and they are very different. And so anyway, they're there in the free access area. My understanding of the reflector is that I understand them through their aura. And again, I don't separate type from aura. I don't. I see them as one thing. That is, I see type as a way of describing what the aura is, in a sense. It's sort of chicken and egg, though. You can play the game, the aura is the byproduct of the frequency, and, so forth and so on. But nonetheless, it is clear to me that the secret to understanding type is by understanding its aura, if I can put it that way. And so when we're dealing with the reflector aura, we're dealing with something very, very interesting, because this is the Teflon aura. It's the Teflon aura. You get to slide off it. You do not penetrate it. You get to slide off it. But there is a level of friction. In other words, that the reflector doesn't have the repelling quality, as an example, of the manifestor. even though, in fact, its aura is quite closed. But it has this Teflon quality in which when it meets other auras, it filters it through. But it filters it through in a very limited way. Those of you that regularly use the jam, you know that we have the Darmen Swan Herbert, who does the neutrino forecast, the daily forecast. Again, that's now a free service in the jam. I think something for anybody entering into design. It's a great way to develop your knowledge. I did the neutrino forecast for I think 13 years. And it took me a long time to find somebody that I could sort of pass that torch along to. Manifestors and reflectors share something in common. We're much more connected, that is, we're much more sensitive is a better word. We're much more sensitive to the program, that is the neutrino program, than we are to the impact of auras of other people. In other words, we have a specific sensitivity. We're less sensitive to the auras of others. We're still obviously affected by them, but less sensitive to the auras of others, more sensitive to the neutrino program. And the reflector is many times more sensitive to the program. In fact, that's what they're built for. You can see that obviously. The very essence of life force in the reflector is something that is only provided by the consistency of the transit field. So the fact is that the reflector has a unique relationship to the program and has a limited sampling, because that's what it does. That is, it's this Teflon aura that samples. And the reflector is always sampling the auras of others rather than connecting to it. So unlike a projector, when a projector focuses on you, you notice it right away. It can feel like it's burning a hole in you. Whereas the reflector can just slide by and grab something. That piece of information that they grab, because that's what we're doing with aura contact. We're exchanging information. The moment that you're in aura contact with anybody, they're affecting your design. That is, they are acting as a conditioning force. So here you just get this sampling, just the taste of what it's like. So it says a lot already about the nature of the reflector as a being. First of all, they're outside of the movie. And of course, no other type is more outside of the movie than the reflector. They are about 1.3% of humanity. Which still means that there's a lot of them. I don't know what that is, 70 million of them or something. There's still a lot of them in the world. But still, it is a true minority. And obviously, they are more than just a minority. They are really different. As a manifestor with my open sacral center, I have a certain affinity to them. We both have a similar sort of relationship to the program. There are similarities, but boy, are they alien. I know how different they are. Because of course they have no definition. It seems like an obvious to say, but I think it's very important to grasp what that means. They have no definition. Definition is what is consistent and reliable. It's definition that forms the bedrock of what the potential of the true self can be. It is definition that brings the consistent life force into the vehicle. One of the reasons why the reflector is the most deeply connected to the program is that it is the program's relationship with the reflector that creates this life force. They are totally dependent on the program to, they certainly don't need people to provide them with that life force. They're not like a projector. Again, people have these things. They see a simple projector that might have, do a John Kennedy. Here's a John Kennedy, like that, okay? And of course this would be colored in, and this would be colored in. And people think that this projector, somehow is similar to this reflector. They're not at all. It becomes a totally different construct. I mean, totally different because there is definition. And you see, one of the things to recognize about the nature of the reflector is that they have a very, very profound role in this life. Because they recognize how everyone fits in or not to the program. You know, they're the cosmic police force, sort of. Cosmic Interpol, you know. I mean, the advantage that the reflector has is that the reflector is one with the program in the way that no one else is. Which means that they understand the prevailing life force and they can match it against whatever they see. And of course what they see is that the reflector is in a world of the not-self in which the program that they can grasp is what is dominating everyone else's life. Which makes reflectors very interesting in the sense that they understand those people who are trying to break out of. They can recognize, they can sense those beings that are ready or trying to break free. Interesting role. They're very, very sensitive to community. You know, they are an essential measuring force, but not something that generally is taken advantage of. I think that Darmen doing the neutrino forecast is the first example of reflector wisdom being publicly shared. That is, you know, really letting people in on what goes on. You know, this is the program, and this is what everybody is dealing with. Pay attention. It is something that's very significant because this is what they're about. You know, when I first began describing reflectors, because I wasn't in a hurry to talk about their spy role, I talked about the canary. You know, the canary in the cage, in the mines in Wales, and the early 19th century, you know, the canaries were more sensitive to gases that were toxic. So if the canaries stopped singing and dropped dead, the miners knew that they had to get the hell out of the mine. Well, the reflectors are canaries. That is, they can sense what's going on. You know, they can deeply connect to the community around them. But of course, those opportunities for them to express that, as I was suggesting with Darmen, this doesn't really happen. And it doesn't really happen because of the way in which they're raised, that the discomfort that they have of being in a world of dense multiple conditioning, like the manifestor, having an aura that doesn't necessarily make their relationships with others easy, particularly in their growing up environment. And of course the great dilemma for reflectors is that if they are not fortunate, they start their lives always in the wrong place. And of course this is something that is so distorting for them, because it is the foundation of them beginning to be able to find some stability. Now of course this is something that is, you know, is a commonality of the Open G Center. Obviously, the Open G Center is about, you know, if you're in the wrong place, you're with the wrong people. And so if you're if you're an Open G baby and you're in the wrong place and you got the wrong parents, and that means you're going to have the wrong upbringing, and it means you're going to meet the wrong friends, go to the wrong schools, and it goes on and on and on and on. It really is not something that is. And of course, you know, without awareness of this, you not only affect the child that has the Open G, but you affect the whole family. I mean, I can remember our family's concern because my youngest son has an Open G, and we found a beautiful place that we wanted to live in. And but you know, the agreement was that it's only if he likes it. You know, and he's the only one with the Open G. If he doesn't like it, there's no point moving in, because nothing's going to work. You know, and there was no, no attempt to sort of, he had no idea, obviously, that was our thinking. I think he was 7 at the time. We just took him with us the day we went to really look the whole place over. Never said a word. Never asked him what he thought. Just waited to hear what he would say. And fortunately he loves him. But I mean, think about the poor reflector, who isn't just simply connected to a family and a place, but needs to be connected to the right community. How important that place is, and they have no choice in that. And they have no way of communicating that to their parents for years and years and years. Finally saying, I don't like it here, and whatever. And in most cases, this is something that is, one of the deepest problems about the development of the reflector is environmental. And one of the first things you can do in helping a reflector, is begin the process of getting them to look at their environment and look at their environment very, very carefully, and to go through what is their strategy, in order to be able to come to a very secure sense of the correctness of where they are or not, because this is something that is the bedrock for them in terms of their process. After all, we are talking about the relationship of strategy and its context to type. And obviously the reflector isn't just simply different because it has a totally unique matrix, or at least the way the matrix operates. But its strategy is also very, very different. Its strategy is connected to an object. And again, I cannot, I cannot stress enough how deeply connected the reflector is to the program. And in their strategy, you can see the real focus of that, a highlight of that, if you will, that this is not about responding, and this is not about informing, and it's not about waiting for an invitation. It's connected to the moon. It's connected to the moon, and it's connected to the moon's rapid cyclical orbit of the wheel. Their connection to the program, and their connection to their specific and unique mechanism, that is their moon. The lunar cycle. The lunar cycle is everything for a reflector. It's everything. In order for a reflector to truly come to grips with their power, because they are powerful beings. Again, we think of openness as a weakness because we, the other three types, we all have definition as a counterpoint. And so we think openness is a weakness because that's how it plays out in our design, but openness is not a weakness for a reflector. It is not a counterpoint to definition. It is what they are. They are this openness. But they are this openness that is connected to a larger body. They're connected to the solar system body. This is what they're connected to. And it is the moon that is the fastest expression of that. The moon roaring around the wheel faster than anything else. And obviously you can see that every step along the way is going to bring some activation somewhere or another to that reflector. And of course it's not just the moon, but the moon is the clock. There are all the other planets, and wherever they happen to be in the program, and what happens when they're in any of those places. In other words, to see how deeply connected the reflector is to the program. And the moon is its mechanism. In that complete cycle of the moon over that, the lunar month, the 28, 29 days of the lunar month, over that time, a reflector processes awareness. this is not a waiting cycle. It's an awareness cycle, or an intelligence cycle. It's like with somebody who is emotional, that goes through this clarity cycle. You have to go through the wave to build the clarity, to see the various points. The awareness cycle for a reflector is day by day by day as the moon moves, approximately 2.5 gates a day that the moon moves through, approximately 15 lines a day that the moon is moving through. And this is this progression as it goes around hitting all these points. It hits the 11, and there's an idea, as it moves along, it hits the 48 and the talent comes out. Step by step by step as the moon goes around, all of the various components get stimulated, and at the end of a cycle, whatever is being processed can then be resolved. This is the way things work. When I asked Darmen to do the forecast, I gave him a lunar cycle to respond, obviously. This is what matters for reflectors. This is the point. This cycle for them gives them authority in their process. But again, you have to see that the reflector, because of their unusual nature, and because of the way in which they can meld in, that is, they are reflectors, that if they are not understood, that, they suffer from the oppression of a world of energy types that dominate the world, that expect everybody to be what they are. And, it is something that is extremely difficult for them and extremely uncomfortable. They are most connected to the homogenized field, which means that they are the ones that can recognize the difference in there. The signature for the reflector is surprise. The surprise that something isn't locked in. The surprise that something can break out. This is what they're here to measure. But in their own life, they have to see that unless they have beings in their life that respect their frequency, because they are lunar, it is frequency. And it needs to be respected in the same way that any type, according to its nature, needs to be respected. It needs to be given time, always. The most uncomfortable thing for a reflector is the pressure to make a decision. This is the most unnatural thing. Because in fact, reflectors don't make decisions. They grind out, over a cycle of the moon, solutions. It's not the same as making a decision. They grind out their solution, whatever that solution happens to be. It may lead to a decision or not. But what they're working on is problem solving in a sense. And going through that whole cycle gives them that power to be able to realize the solution. Now, you look at the world that we live in, and you look at a world that is dominated by sacral beings, and you look at a world that is dominated by definition, and you look at a world in which nobody wants to wait. All the generators want things to happen now. Nobody wants to wait. And here's the reflector, and the reflector needs to set a waiting standard. I love you, dear, and I want you to be with me forever. Well, give me a cycle of the moon, will you? You know? Pity the poor reflector. The not-self, they never get a chance for anything like that. You know, this is a world of pressure. This is a world of go, 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 go. You know, so this is one of the things to understand about, you know, the reflector as a being. If you're going to embrace a reflector in your life and you're going to embrace them as a friend or as a lover or as a colleague, you have to understand their gift. And you also have to understand that, you know, anything that is truly important that you need from them, that you have to understand that you can never put pressure on that. I need it now. I need it tomorrow, you know, because it just is not the point for them. It is not going to work for them, and they're never going to be able to have the authority they need. The authority that arises out of the natural emergence of the solution. I mean, this is them, but they have to have the time, which means they have to be respected, which means they have to be recognized, which is not, you know, this is not something that's common. You know, reflectors are one of the few types that really have to go out of their way to say to somebody, look, I don't operate the way you do. I need a lot of time to process things. You know, and if you can't give me a lot of time, then, you know, there's no point in us dealing with each other. And again, you know, the truth is a very, very powerful thing. Reflectors need to set the standard of the kind of respect that they expect from others. Whether it is, you know, somebody wants to hire you for a job, you know, and you want the job, you know, and you can be under enormous pressure. You know, the fact is, as a reflector, you know, if you jump on that, well, you know, if you don't take it today, someone else will get it. Well, okay. You know, if you don't think that I'm worthy of waiting, you know, for, well, all right. See, that's a real challenge. See, one of the things that is part of discovering your own authority is beginning to trust. Beginning to trust in who you are, beginning to trust in the integrity of what it is to be you, to begin to trust that when you are correct, that you're not going to be punished for it. You have to trust that. See, the reflector has to trust that their certainty, their truth, their solution is more important than anything else. And if they're not allowed to get to that point, because of course what will happen is that the reflector takes the job because they don't want to lose it, because they think they will. And by the time that the moon finally does complete the cycle, they quit. Because the solution shows itself. And they realize it was all wrong. And they never had a chance to get there beforehand and avoid all that. See, a reflector has to have the courage to demand that their cycle of awareness is respected. And that not to be afraid that nobody is going to play that game. Some won't. But those weren't the ones that you were going to be able to work successfully with or be successful with anyway. But the ones who allow that, the ones who accept that, you know, they may not like it, but it's your terms. That when you do get to the solution, if they're part of the solution, you're going to have a very successful connection in whatever it is. See, to be a reflector is not simply to be different, but to express that difference in the way in which you expect to be treated. Well, we have taken our little journey through the various types now. There's just one thing I want you to keep in mind from all of that. You know, the strategy that arises out of type. This is a key. It is the basic key. It is a generic, though. There are so many variations and nuances in all of these types. We are all unique in that sense. But when we're looking at type, we're looking at the specific vehicular models that we have, and the way in which these models express their energy, the auras that go with them. And in understanding how it works, following the strategy allows you for the first time to make decisions according to what is in fact your true potential. The potential of what it is to be a nine-centered being. The potential that lies in the consciousness of your design. You know, my formula, expressed endlessly, I don't know how many thousands of times I've said it, strategy and authority. Well, we'll do the other side of that over the next 2 weeks. We're going to take a look at authority. And that combination together, the strategy and the authority,